generation teach? He's going to tell us a little bit about that when he responds to the first question. The third member of our panel is Reverend Dr. M. William Howard, the pastor of Bethany Baptist Church, a current member of the Rutgers Board of Governors and a former chairman of the Rutgers Board of Governors. Next to him is our old friend Sam Delgado of Verizon, New Jersey, and rounding out the panel is the Reverend Dr. What is this guy's name? Calvin Butts of Abyssinian Baptist Church in New York City, also the president of, let me think the name of that school is. I think we all know. Reverend Butts had a little difficulty getting with us this morning. We had intended for him to be on panel number 1, but since his friend Bill Howard is on panel number 2, I thought it would make sense for the two of them to chat with us together. All right, the first question, as in panel number 1, will be posed by me, as will a couple of other follow-up questions, and then we will again open it up to the audience. But we do have time constraints on this session, and we'll have to get out of this room at a designated hour, the witching hour we will be reminded of as we move forward. But the first question has to do with the challenges that each of you see impacting communities of color as they attempt to address to the realities of higher education in America. What are the challenges that confront our community as we attempt to take advantage of this asset called higher education? Are the challenges purely financial? Are they challenges that are encapsulated by a lack of vision? Are there challenges that are associated with gaining access? What, in your view, are the two most important challenges that you'd like to share with the assembled group? And Dr. Butts, since you were a little late for the first panel, we'll let you go first on this panel.
Thank you, Brother Roper, and good afternoon to all of you. It's a pleasure to have been invited to participate in this forum by Positive Community, and it is also a great honor to be in this great state of New Jersey and in the wonderful city of Newark. So thank you very much. Two things are really challenging for people of African descent in the United States of America regarding higher education. One is affordability, and the other, believe it or not, remains access. Affordability, money. Even where state education, so if you're a resident of New Jersey and you go to a state institution, a resident of New York, you go to a state institution, the tuition is certainly going to do one thing for sure, and that's go up. And for state schools, which, by the way, I am encouraging all of us in the black community to consider seriously, because while they continue to become even more expensive as the years roll on, they still are a better value than many of our private institutions where the tuitions are really out of reach. And if they are available to us, for example, in New York, public institutions like the City University of New York, and even at one time the State University of New York, tuition was free. And that ought to be one of the things that we argue for legislatively, because many of the men and women who are now doing very well in their various professions and vocations went to school in terms of higher education for free. They did not have to pay tuition. So I encourage you to look at public education. But even with that, tuition costs are rising. And we must make preparation to meet the challenge of affordability. You have to save, or something that many young people today may not be as aware of as some of us were aware of, is that you can work and go to school. It may take you a little longer, but of course it helps you to pay the cost. We might want to take a closer look at cooperative education, ways that you can intern or work and simultaneously receive credit. so that while you are working, you are earning and you are paying and you are already involved in a job that could be a job that's yours upon completion of your degree. We might want to take a look not only at the legislative route of returning to free tuition, and that's a tough one because the cost of education continually increases. But we might also want to take a look at cooperative education more closely. And, dearly beloved, where we are concerned, and I say this with the greatest regard, I went to Morehouse College, it's a historically black college, university, HBCU. But even our best HBCUs are out of reach for many people in the African American community. So I'm encouraging you to look hard at state institutions, and wherever you can, or public institutions, and wherever you can, press for free education, free higher education. The other is access. Access really now depends on our ability to compete for the slots. I'll give you an example. In our state school, we have an excellent mixture, great diversity. However, with the economy being in the condition that it's in, you find that other ethnic and racial groups are also looking more carefully at the state institutions. And so therefore, the state institutions become places that are very competitive in terms of entry. So access is based on our ability to compete. And in order for us to compete, the same basic skills are required. Reading, you got to be able to read well. You got to be able to handle numbers well. There are only 10 of them, 0 through 9. What could be so difficult about that? But finally, you've got to know how to write. And this is one of the biggest challenges that all Americans face. All Americans. I don't care what race or ethnic group you come from. However, with our concern in the African American community, many of the adults who are college graduates cannot write well. And so the competition is really going to be focused on writing and your ability to communicate your thoughts on the page or on the screen, however you write, with pen or with keyboard. And access is going to become more and more competitive. Tom Friedman was right. The digital age made the world flat again. So now, you know, you can say, well, they're discriminating against me because I am black. Well, that's still true out there. Don't get me wrong now. I'm not crazy. But I also recognize that the achievement level has to be improved, because if you send in an application, and we don't know who's who today, you know, you be Delgado and be black as me, you know, we don't know. Yeah, right, that's the point. You don't know who's who. You could be Schwartz and be black as me. And when that goes in, people are going to look at it based on the quality of the product, that application, that written example. And then they'll make the decision. So these are at least two things. Now, there are many more things that we ought to consider. But, you know, given the restraints of time, I'll leave those two with you and a few thoughts surrounding them. Affordability and access. These are two primary challenges that stand in the way of many African Americans getting a better quality or even getting at all higher education.
Thank you, Reverend. How long have you been president of Old Westbury?
I've been at Old Westbury now, I'm going into my 14th year. And, you know, I encourage you, if you're in the state of New Jersey, you have to pay out-of-state tuition, so, you know, you can come, but it flies in the face of affordability. But 14 years now, going into the 14th year.
Sam Delgado, the two key challenges that you think confront communities of color.
Well, I feel that, listening to Reverend Butts here, I feel he's reading right from my script. Number one, and I have to echo the Reverend's comments on affordability. $60,000 is the cost of undergraduate degree, undergraduate tuition and board, room and board in Johns Hopkins University. My niece is a sophomore in Johns Hopkins, currently a sophomore in Johns Hopkins. And her room and board and tuition is $60,000. That is a huge amount. My entire 4 years of college, I came away with a $2,500 loan. That's what I owed Uncle Sam at the end of 4 years. I graduated in 1978. It was $2,500. I was $52 a month, and I thought to myself, how am I ever going to eat this? How am I ever going to pay $52 a month? When my niece graduates in 2 years, in 2015, 2014, she's going to have over $100,000. That's not uncommon. That is not uncommon for a young person today coming out of undergraduate or graduate school to be straddled with such debt. What is that creating? That is creating two tiers of people. Right? People that could afford to go to college, people that can't afford to go to college. We can talk about working. We can talk working yourselves through the school. All right. I know myself. My father owned a gypsy cab in the Bronx, and when I asked him to help me out for college, took out the keys to the gypsy cab and said, "Here you go." So what I did was I scheduled my college class schedules around when he was off, when he wasn't driving the cab. So I would, have my classes up to Thursday afternoon, get back home, take the cab and work Thursday evening, Friday, Saturday, and Sundays. That's how I got through college 20-odd, 30-odd years ago. Today, it's difficult. It's difficult. So tuition and the cost of college education is a great challenge, and it's going to be a great challenge. And unless we address it, and address it in a way that's equitable for people, there will be two tiers in this society. And the second issue that I think, I think it's a cultural issue, and I want to tell a story that affected me, that's affected me for the past 18 years, and it's very, very telling about our culture. In 1994, I was assigned, I had a State Department assignment, and I was assigned down to the Republic of Haiti during the turmoil down there, during the change of government down in Haiti. And as a I was a military officer assigned to the State Department overseeing human rights abuses and training and mentoring the new incoming interim public security force that we installed there. I had the opportunity the State Department put us up in a nice hotel up on top of a mountain called the Monjoli, Happy Mountain. And I would go out on patrols during the day with my staff, and I would come back at night around dusk. And as we climbed the mountain, along the side of the mountain there would be young people underneath these lights. The hotel had the only area in town that had generators, and the lights were going on. And I didn't pay it any mind. I thought it was just young people hanging out. Hanging out. So one day I stopped to get out to talk to them, and I saw they had the school books underneath the lights. All right, underneath the lights of this hotel, they were doing their homework. Right, they were doing their homework. And I asked one of the young girls there, she must have been 10 or 11. I said, why do you come here? She said, well, she explained these were the only lights in that area of town. And she said something to me. She said, my father, and this is exactly what she said, and it stayed to me to this day. My father said that if I studied hard and I did my homework, that I would be able to go to Miami and work one day. Right? Now, those words were profound to me, but what was even more profound to me, all right, was not so much the words, but the motivation that I saw with those young folks, okay? Studying underneath those lights, all right? That motivation, because I know myself, me personally, as a young man growing up, I would never sit under a traffic light or a street light to study. I never would have done that. And that was what was profound to me. That motivation, is somehow we could bottle that motivation that those young people had under that traffic light in Cape Haitian Haiti and have that with our young people, all right? I think that would go a long way to helping us out.
Thank you, Sam. Reverend Howard?
Wow. Listen, I haven't written anything since I've been at the table. Here are my notes. They've just been exhausted by the previous speakers. I am in full support of everything I've heard, but I'm going to try to offer two additional as we push the envelope, shall we say. So I want to identify with affordability, accessibility, and what I wrote down as the pipeline, which is in crisis right now in many places, not in every place. But I'm going to say my two things would be the self, family, and community expectation of higher education, and the individual's appetite for higher education. And I would put this under the rubric of the very purpose of learning. We're in a context now where you go to school to get a job. The job is very important. But in the Jim Crow South, we certainly wanted to have a job, but somehow the elders who had influence on me wanted me to go to school to learn to be a better person, to be a leader, to help shape a new future for the community. So the purpose of education, the motive of education that was instilled in me by my elders sent me off to college with a certain appetite for learning to fulfill a certain purpose. Now, I tell you the one place where I feel I'm going to be weakest, if you got those two things, I'm going to elaborate a little bit. I'm weakest on why the appetite and purpose have gotten blurred, in my humble opinion. I have some opinions on that, but I'm not as firm in my footing about why. But anecdotally, I'll say to you that when I was president of New York Theological Seminary, I encountered the college graduates who could not write a one-page essay, who could not think analytically. In a class of 25, and I'm speaking here without having measured this, but I would say 5 students who wrote with a depth of understanding of the subject matter. But they were graduates, and many of them were professionals, and they came to theological seminary. I remember my valedictory after a time of service. I was on my way to Newark. I gave an address to the students, and I told them that my greatest fear was that they were the Teflon generation, that they would go to a school of higher learning, and one of their most vigorous ambitions is to ensure that their views on things would be essentially the same as they were when they went in. Now, of course, this is a theological school, and they're grounded in church, so they wanted that MDiv degree, but they didn't want to have the baggage of knowing what that MDiv degree represented. And they were very interested in the credential. And to highlight my point, and hopefully we'll have a chance to engage one another, we had a practice at NYTS, as I think maybe Old Westbury and other schools may have, that a student will receive at graduation a folder without the diploma if they had a balance on their bill. So we would have the really uproaring, glorious graduations with family, church, and everybody there watching, taking pictures. And so we had a number of people who not only had a balance, but didn't bother to pay. So I called this guy that I knew in Staten Island. I said, hey, brother, I said, look, why don't you get your diploma? You owe us. And it wasn't a lot of money. And he told me he wasn't planning anytime soon to present this money. And by some circuitous means, I learned that he had a picture of himself receiving his folder from Dr. Howard on the wall in his study. That's a little funny story, but it camouflages a truth. Our preoccupation with credentials. We should have our credentials if we do the work, but our credentials are not the purpose of going to school.
Yes.
Well, maybe it is. I'm just saying. I'm old-fashioned, you know. I'm pre-hip-hop. You know, what do I know? But I think we need a revolution. I think we need a revolution in expectations of what learning is for. And I think that has to originate at the kitchen table. My grandmother went 3 years to Shady Grove School, somewhere out in the backwoods of Sumter County in Georgia. But every night she wanted to see my algebra homework. She wouldn't know algebra from a man in the moon. She determined if I were doing well by how many erasures were on my homework paper. But the expectation of high achievement for the sake of empowering the community is almost there. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we turn to the hip-hop generation and Darryl.
By the way, was this water poured for me?
I think so.
I want to be sure because in Georgia we learned don't drink behind anybody.
All right, Darryl, don't let him upstage.
Very, very difficult to follow that up. But good morning to everyone. And I definitely would like to thank the Positive community for inviting me to join the panel today. And very honored and humbled to be on this panel with such esteemed gentlemen. So very happy to be here. And I'm here today representing Generation Next, which is an organization dedicated to developing young leaders in the Black community through practical experience. And I'm executive director of Generation Teach, which is a program affiliate of Generation Next, with the mission of actually increasing the number of Black male teachers nationally. And so it's actually fitting that this is a topic of discussion. I do believe the two critical issues are definitely still access and cost. However, I want to dive a little bit more in depth on the topic of accessibility for college. You know, as it relates to having Black male teachers in the classroom, I truly believe that this is the way to changing the numbers overall. I think it's fitting that we're here in New Jersey, actually, where the rates for Black male graduation is actually doing well, 75%. And here in Newark, at least this is according to the Shop Foundation. Maybe you guys that are here in the room with the boots on the ground might object to that. But this is their numbers. And with that being said, you know, looking at the Department of Education, and for the next 5 years, the Secretary, Arnie Duncan, has actually identified increasing the number of Black male teachers as one of the agency's top 5 priorities over the next 10 years, because they've now come to recognize that this is one way, a small step on tackling a much larger problem, you know, right across the river, so to speak, where the graduation rate for Black males is at 47%, less than half. This is something that is a crisis and we're happy to be out there on the front lines to address it. So beyond, just the Secretary, Spike Lee is a huge advocate of this as well, making sure that there are now an increased pipeline that Dr. Howard alluded to for black male teachers. I'm actually a product of a historically black college. I attended Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina, the oldest HBCU in the South, might I add. But I would say that without a lot of black male teachers, mentors, etc., I never would have gotten to that point. I didn't come from a family where they could pay for me to go to college. So I learned through, and I remember on the first panel someone mentioned that we are more focused on the social side. That's actually true, but in a different way. Not necessarily the party atmosphere and the social life, but co-curricular activities to offset my academics so that I'd have the possibility to actually level out the playing field with my counterparts, so to speak. And so I would encourage everyone here, if you know someone that has the potential to look into teaching as a profession, and if you haven't grabbed them by the hand and encourage them to do it, because it's tough. The pay is not that great in a lot of ways. There's not a lot of incentives right now for black male teachers to look into that as a possible profession. So I know we're going to talk a lot about the problems here in the room today, but I do want to look at some of the solutions that are available, and I think that the one that is most pressing and something that we can do something about today is actually increasing the pipeline of black male teachers. So thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Bindle?
Well, in a sense, it's easy to follow up here. All the comments have been so very interesting. So I'm going to in part comment on the comments. I want to thank my friend Adrian Council for putting me on this panel today. We've been good friends for a long time, and of course I want to commend him for his vision in putting together these roundtables that have just been so absolutely wonderful and have brought so many talented people to talk about issues in a more general way and go beyond the politics and the power and the money and who you know and all those other kinds of issues. So this is very healing and very important for our community because here we have an opportunity to think and to talk about the issues that are just so very important. Give you a little story about that. You remember, of course, the war in Vietnam, and the government and the Pentagon would constantly say, well, we have a new policy now, we see the light at the end of the tunnel. And of course they never delivered. We all remember those pictures of Vietnamese people grabbing onto the bottoms of helicopters as they were flying off the rooftops in Saigon. Next day, the name of that city is Ho Chi Minh City. Just like that. Done deal. So they were wrong, weren't they? Robert McNamara, who was one of the best and the brightest, of course, that were leading that effort, he did write a book about what really happened sometime later. And he talked about the conversations that occurred in the Pentagon when the policymakers were figuring out the strategy of how to conduct the war. And he said there was one question that was never raised. There was one issue that was never discussed. And that question was, should we be in Vietnam? Should we be there? Is this mistake or is this policy and this war effort fundamentally flawed? And of course, many of us looking back, and many of us who were alive even during that time and participated in demonstrations against the war in Vietnam, we knew it was wrong. We knew that our government had made a mistake, and we knew that we were going down the wrong path, and the country suffered the consequences. So here we come together to discuss education in a higher sense, and the questions then that we may ask is, what is education? and what is education for? According to the tradition, and according to the very word education, the prefix E means X, and the DUC and the duck part means to lead out. Education historically is a way of leading people out of the place where they are and helping them to get vision and knowledge and skills and develop purposes that enhance their life. Education historically is not about getting a credential. It's not about getting a job. It's not about making your way in the world. Historically and classically, education is about learning to become a fully mature and developed human being. That's the classical model. Part of our difficulties today when we talk about education is we're quite parochial. We just assume these fundamental understandings and values that we have, that it is basically about launching your career and getting a job, and that's it. But as Dr. Williams mentioned during the first panel, historically we have these liberal arts colleges, and in the liberal arts colleges we think about values, we study the humanities. A lot of this material is really very basic. Study of the humanities, what is that? People might think, well, we're talking about art and music and drama and these kinds of things. No, those are parts, those are topics in the humanities. In the humanities, we study what it is to be human and what it means to become human. And that's the point of the humanities, and that's the reason why they're so very important. And if we dislocate the humanities and make them secondary, then we have major issues in our educational system. The issues that we're struggling with here in Newark are issues that are shared in many, many different places in the world. Some of you might know that my daughter is a professor at Oxford University. She's an archaeologist. And thanks to the time of Maggie Thatcher and the current values that now drive the British government, funding has dried up in the British universities. So my daughter is talking about the same issues that we're talking about here today. Affordability, accessibility. I visited my daughter in Oxford during the Christmas holidays, and she was talking about the interviews that she had conducted. And there was one young woman who had interviewed for her college, and she said, "I'm sorry I'm a little bit late, but I'm just coming from a demonstration." And the demonstration was against the high cost of education in the British universities. My daughter was totally sympathetic and totally understood, you know. But those are the issues. And then in conversation with my daughter, she said something that to me was pretty stunning. And it was stunning in part that because although my daughter is a professor at Oxford University, she didn't show a certain kind of awareness that I hoped that she would show. And she was part of a group of 250 Oxford faculty members who came together in convocation and wrote this very critical paper about the educational policies in the British universities, and they took the government to task for its educational policies. Someone here on the panel spoke about the usefulness, for example, of making education free for all people who can benefit from it. And we heard the other example of $60,000 to go to Johns Hopkins University. Well, $15,000 more than the $45,000 that it takes to keep a person in prison for 1 year. So there are other kinds of issues here.
All right, thank you, Dr. Bender. We'll get back to you as we advance this conversation. We want to get engaged in a broader discussion of this issue of higher education in a contextual way that focuses more specifically on what we as a community of citizens who happen to be African Americans and or members of communities of color. And one of the issues that was raised during the course of the first set of responses had to do with the cultural influences that impact in either a helpful or a hurtful way in terms of how our communities embrace and take advantage of the opportunities that higher education offers. I want to ask Dr. Butts and Dr. Howard specifically if they could touch on this issue of cultural influences that impact higher education in positive and or negative ways, to see if we can get some a dialogue going along those lines. Dr. Butts.
One of the first things is I want to look at culture from the point of view of preparing a young person to learn. So if we look at etymology, cultivare is to till the soil, to prepare it, to receive the seed, if you will, that will be nurtured and eventually sprout and grow. Our young people may be more engaged, and I have some empirical evidence, and so do you, I think, if they can see themselves in the curriculum. One of the things that we have argued about over and over again is the absence of any kind of historical sensitivity as it relates to people of African descent. Beyond a cursory review of slavery, maybe some reference to the civil rights movement and Dr. King, but never anything that really reflects upon the tremendous contributions, let's just say not only in the world, but let's just say in the United States of America, that people of African descent have made. So if I am not reflected in the curriculum, what engages me? If I don't see myself and I don't understand how I'm related, then I may lose interest, become bored, or detached. So, for example, if I'm studying the humanities, why wouldn't I study John Work or John Coltrane? Why wouldn't I study Phyllis Wheatley or Gwendolyn Brooks or Maya Angelou? Why wouldn't I know the works beyond What Happens to a Dream Deferred of Langston Hughes, Countee Cullen, and the dialect poetry, among other types of poetry, of Paul Laurence Dunbar? Now, my empirical evidence is we have created several schools. One is the Thurgood Marshall Lower School, and I went to the graduation of the 5th grade. I went to their special presentation at the Schomburg. Everything was centered around the culture of people of African descent. So all the poetry was, at the Schomburg, was Maya Angelou's poetry, stuff I hadn't even heard. And in the graduation ceremony, all the references were to people of African descent. Now that doesn't mean that you negate what others, because there was a reference to Robert Frost, you know. There was references to other men and women who may not have been, or who were not African American. But the fact that these youngsters could see themselves in the curriculum helped them to identify more with what was happening with their education. So in New Jersey, I'm sure, in New York, I'm sure, because I've been with you now a long time, and we have argued for black studies. But it has never, not yet, and one of the sons of New Jersey, actually Georgia, but Lynn Jeffries, he's in New York, lost his position at City College because of a radical stance he took about black studies. And it has never been fully incorporated into the curriculum of our schools. And so I would argue from a cultural point of view that, you know, who was, is it Henry O. Tanner? Who were some of the other great
Painters?
painters? Yeah. And these young people are being taught by Faith Rango, who's still living. A wonderful woman of immense creativity. So therefore, dearly beloved, we have to, from a cultural point of view, include this in the curriculum. And I think that will engage using social media and everything else. And I see these kids, you know, in the 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, cell phones, iPods, all this stuff. And if they are engaged with who we are, I think it will help. I'm not offering this as the end-all and be-all, but I'm sure it will make a major contribution to engaging our young men and women, not only in terms of primary education, but also secondary and higher education.
Thank you, Dr. Butts. Dr. Howard, and then I want to have Darrell respond to this as well.
I was just thinking, Ms. Roper, how you and I sat not long ago in an audience listening to Felipe, is it Felipe Fiasco?
Lupe.
Lupe.
Yeah.
There you go. Dr. Butts mentioned Coltrane. I knew that.
There you go.
I like the way our conversation is flowing because I'm feeling a sense of building blocks, you know, the platform, and then you add a little bit. And Dr. Butts' point about seeing yourself in what you learn is vitally important, vitally important. And I'm one who says that, you know, if you like Baroque music, make sure you familiarize yourself with Jimmy Reed and Muddy Waters before you go there, Dr. Forbes. But I'm gonna press a little bit because Calvin and Sam painted a very accurate picture from my perspective of the sobering reality of accessibility and what I call the pipeline, but we agree. That is the point. And Dr. Butts made the point of depending, your name could be anything, but when they're looking at the application, they look at the quality of the product. That whole line of presentation at the outset of this panel is the sobering reality that we face, whether we get Lupe or John Coltrane or Maya Angelou in the curriculum or not. Are you there? Yeah. The train has left the station, and there is no excuse accepted. I'm not suggesting there aren't reasons that we might legitimately use, but the fact is the game is on. And you either do or you don't. Can I get an amen on that? Amen. This is where we are now. Am I right, Dr. Butts? This is where we are. You have to submit. You have to submit an application that is sufficiently competitive with your peers. And you have to show me the money. Now, New Jersey ranks number 47. And I heard Dr. Butts also made a very important point about public institutions. They are actually more affordable than, how much does it cost to go to Morehouse now?
Well, it's at least $20,000 just tuition alone.
Tuition alone, not room and board.
Not room and board.
And Courtney, I remember when we crossed the Rubicon just a couple years ago, Rutgers 20,000 for the whole ball of wax, something like that. So Rutgers is in a state that is number 47th and competing to go to 48. in terms of state support for its public institutions. Declining. If you look at the graph, it's declining. And the truth is, you got to have the money and you got to be able to compete. Now, I grew up on Dick and Jane. They didn't look like me. Now, I want some Langston Hughes. I want all of the great poets. I want Lupe Fiasco. I'm going to try to learn what he's saying. Every now and then when I can understand it, I agree with it. Khalid Kweli, you know, those folk, I like what I hear when I can understand it, right? I got old ears. So culture continues. It's not just the Harlem Renaissance, which we know, but seeing people like you reflected in literature and in other offerings is vitally reassuring to the student. In the Freedom School, up here in Bethany now, kids are being exposed to books with figures or pictorial representations that look like them and that reflect the reality of their lives. But I'm going to say that part of culture that we talk too little about is economics. And I'm not talking about starting a business economics. I mean, that's good too. Start a business. I'm talking about an economic analysis of the predicament we're in. We have had the family undergirded by capital flight in this city. So we have drug abuse, poor schools, poor housing, the family's falling apart. Look, economics is more than getting a job. We need to understand the underpinnings of our economic life. Because so much of what happens to us culturally, the lack of self-esteem, the lack of aspiration is rooted in the fact that our families are crumbling because of the economic base. For example, right in this town, Dr. Butts, last week or so, a glorious exhibit of the painting of Romare Bearden opened. And the museum went out of its way to open the show to draw attention to it. But I would like to believe that if I walked over to the museum today to see the lines, we would be in the majority. But I won't go over there today because I'm afraid that we won't be. So the appetite is being subverted by our basic stability. And that is a fairly new phenomenon in the black community, even in Newark. I mean, look, if Romare Bearden were opening in Americus, Georgia, my grandmother wouldn't have known who the hell that was, but she knew that the people with education was saying it was a good thing. She said, boy, get your clothes on. We're going to see this thing. You know this, right? So we have to figure out why. I don't know why. I'm tempted to say why, but I really don't know why.
Go ahead, if you're tempted, say it.
I mean, I know economics is a part of it. I am convinced that Newark is the city we know today because the things that drew us here from the South don't exist anymore. And we are going right along as if it does. We got to come to terms with this. We got to organize ourselves around the problem of our economic base. And I tell you, one of the reasons why the Black Studies programs have not fared as well, not the only reason, don't quote me as saying that, is our appetite for this knowledge, which I'm persuaded is the key to our sense of self. I mean, literally, a key to our sense of self. But if you go to some of the finest programs, those that are still left, if you look across the country, by the way, 2 years ago, they were all 40 years old, right? Look at the programs that are now have been emaciated, but look at those that are still going, and the professors will tell you that we're not necessarily the ones demanding this area of study. And I think we should be in the forefront of this. We want everybody to come and learn, but we ought to be setting the pace. Now, I've said too much. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Butts wants to put in another word.
Yeah, because I think it's important to point out that, for instance, when you talk about the African American male assuming a position in front of the classroom, first of all, it's not the end all and be all, that was acknowledged, but it's a step. And the preparation and having that person, for instance, it's the argument that some of us make about Barack Obama. The sheer fact that you can look up and see that a black person is president of the United States has a tremendous impact in and of itself. Whether he does anything or not, whether he represents the fact that, wow, it's possible. And a youngster who sees it says, okay, so it's no longer a big deal anymore, at least not as much as it was for some of us. The same thing is true when you get down to having young people, and I'm talking about empirical, I'm talking about what I see, and in models that we can replicate. For instance, what made Marva Collins so successful? What made Benjamin Elijah Mays so? These are great educators. Mary McLeod Bethune, Booker T. Washington, Barbara Sizemore, and we can name others, perhaps even in Newark, who have been successful in their individual schools with models. A youngster who is 8, when he or she is learning English, may not be able to discern right away the importance of knowing or seeing that it's Gwendolyn Brooks associated with the poem that they're learning. But the sheer impression of that and the ability to make recall when you get to the point that you know has a profound impact. Where do you start? And you start there. So for all of us who majored in African studies, what do we do with it? And for the cultural persons among us, it is important. Everyone, and as I'll make this the last point, pushes and celebrates their culture at any expense. The illustration is Lincoln Center, set smack in the middle of Manhattan Island. Huge money goes into promoting white European culture. Now we fought and got jazz at Lincoln Center. Yes. But for years, the Metropolitan Opera, the ballet, all of that never reflected, except with maybe a little nod here and there, who we are. And those who invest, they know that culture is the glue. So the denizens of the captains of commerce and industry, Ford, DuPont, Rockefeller, they give huge amounts of money to support their culture for the benefit of their children. And we don't know that. And we have to begin to support it. Now, it's a scratch at the surface. Bill is right. We've got to look at how to survive economically and make money. But there's a profound, I'm telling you, I do community development. We've done $600 million of it. Supermarkets, stores, schools, apartment buildings. But yet, getting the support for culture, almost impossible. The actress, Cicely Tyson, just built a school over here about culture. It is, you look around and you see how people support the culture of their society. And you will see how profoundly important and why we get so upset with the prostitution and, pardon the expression, bastardization of our culture that degrades our women, that uses foul language, and that takes our dress and our pride and destroys it with watching somebody's underwear, for example. There's nothing more important. And the church is culture bearer. Bill knows that. He has the Vespers at Bethany as often as he can. He knows that. The church is culture bearer. And when New Jersey PAC opened up and we had an opportunity to get in, one of the first things that they did was organize a clergy council. They invited me to be on it. And I'm in Harlem. Because somebody knows how radically important. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I do want to just emphasize how profoundly. Who else did something on Malcolm but Spike and treated him well?
Thank you.
It's the most
Darryl,
successful movie.
Darryl, and then Sam. Darryl?
I think one of the major cultural influences right now that is hurting the youth perception of higher education is basically that the structure's been devalued. I mean, if you look at, or the institution's been devalued, excuse me, and it's because of the structure of higher education. You know, when someone's sitting down at a table with family or maybe by themselves and they're doing a cost-benefit analysis. Maybe they don't know that's exactly what they're doing, but they're doing a cost-benefit analysis for the cost of higher education, and they're saying to themselves, is this worth it? And there's a lot of reasons why, but one of the big reasons I think is what we've done and who we kind of look at now to be standard bearers of excellence and accumulation of wealth. If you look at what it used to be scholars that we would hold up high, you know, W.E.B. Du Bois, Charles Ogletree, John Hope Franklin. These were the folks that we put at the forefront of society. If you look at present day, those folks are, you know, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, you know, Mark Zuckerberg, LeBron James, and they all have one thing in common. None of them finished college. And so if this is what we're seeing in front of our face on a daily basis right now, and then you were doing the cost-benefit analysis and looking at the cost of higher education, we'll say to ourselves, I think I'll take my $20K and, you know, because we have an extended adulthood now where, you know, adulthood is now classified, where it used to be before 30 you were trying to make it, it's been pushed out to like 35 now. So we're a little bit we're more prone now to taking risk. And some of that risk is not depending on the institution of higher education to get us to where we want to be in life. Now, obviously that comes with a lot of risk in and of itself. A lot of the purpose of higher education, rather indirectly, is to provide a certain level of cushion for you in your life. And I think that right now, where most of the youth is looking at this system of higher education and seeing that it's not really effective because there's not a guarantee involved, and not that there's ever been, but it was a common perception that if you went to school, you were coming out of school with a better job and more pay.
It's still true.
Right, and it's still true overall, absolutely. But there can be the contrarians out there that are a lot louder nowadays about the significance and importance and value of higher education. So I think if we can begin to now change who the standard, revert back to who the standard bearers in society are, I think that's one of the cultural influences that can help change the youth's perception of higher education.
That's a very good observation. Thank you very much. Sam?
Yeah, I just want to touch on what you just said, because for every LeBron James that's out there, there's 10,000 kids that don't make it. So I feel that the conversation has to be about, you know, yeah, you have your aspiration, go for it, but be realistic. Be realistic. You may not make it. You may not make it. I just want to touch upon, because Reverend Howard talked about the economics, and as you invited me here as a businessman, I wanted to talk a little bit about the economics, right? And Reverend Howard mentioned those things that brought your people here from the South are no longer here. Same thing. Those businesses and mills that brought, you know, my folks here from Puerto Rico are no longer here. And I can remember 20 years ago when I had my business in Newark. I owned Minuteman Press on Halsey Street, and I was not a very good businessman. I sold it. It's on Commerce Street now. I'll admit it.
If you sold it, that means somebody bought it.
That's true, that's true, but, I'll admit that. Anyway, 20 years ago, New Jersey Bell, Prudential, they went through the departments, and that's how, and they made a good living doing that, all right? Flash forward 20 years to the future, okay, actually 23 years to the future, I'm in my office at Verizon, and if I need 10 cases of paper, I go online, and I go to my company website, and I order 10 cases of paper from Staples, all right? It's there the next day, all right? So what has that done to cities like Newark, all right? Those jobs, those salespeople that were making a fairly good living, all right, in small mom and pop companies, all right, can no longer do that, right? Because the economic model has changed. Globalization, the supply chain that used to exist there. People come to me, you know, I sit on the Brick City Development Corporation with Richard, and people come to me, you know, what more can Verizon do, you know, to stimulate the local businesses here, all right? Big business like Verizon, we're here to, you know, I hate to say it, but maximize our margins, all right? Maximize our margins. 53% of our stockholders are institutional stockholders, which means that pension funds, exactly. Which means that everybody, if you have a 401k in this room, well, you have a piece of Verizon. And I have to ensure, Verizon has to ensure a rate of return to your pension fund. So that's how the economic model's changed. Those jobs are no longer here. So we have to come up with new strategies in education to fit the new global economy. And that's the challenge.
Okay, thanks, Sam. All right, I want to open the conversation up to you so that you might be able to engage our panelists in a discussion. And as I said at the point at which we opened up the conversation in the first panel, please identify yourself by name and affiliation, if you'd like, when you pose your question. We've got a mic somewhere in the area, okay, that will be circulating to those hands that are raised. Yes. Dr. Margaret Hayes.
My name is Margaret Hayes, and I'm a member of Bethany Baptist Church.
All right, say that.
My question, I have to preface it with an experience I had. Coming out of higher education, I was hired to CUNY when they had open admission, with hiring a lot of us African Americans at that time. They also didn't have tuition. They were just starting tuition at that time. At that time, I had an opportunity. We were faculty in the student life department. I was a faculty member. And then there were academic faculty. I happened to speak with one of the academic faculty members in the teacher lounge who was very upset because she just didn't understand the students. And she just didn't know what to do. She was ready to quit teaching. And I realized that these faculty saw themselves as teachers at Harvard-on-the-Hudson. We were at Borough Manhattan Community College, by the way. And they saw themselves as faculty at Harvard-on-the-Hudson and did not understand how to deal with these new students. I and some of my other counseling faculty, I volunteered to facilitate a focus group so that we could discuss in some way and look at some of the issues and problems. I say all that to ask the question, have faculty and their feelings about teaching in these community colleges and other places, have they changed? Has it helped with black faculty being hired? Do we need more black faculty in order to be successful in teaching our students?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Who wants to go first?
Yes, we need more black faculty. Absolutely. And the numbers that present themselves for places like Borough Manhattan and other places, Bergen County and everything, are woefully low. We don't have the numbers of faculty, African American with terminal degrees, that can fill a lot of the slots that are available. So this is another challenge for higher education. And promotion, making sure that these faculty persons, as someone said, are on a tenure track, because now the trend is for adjuncts, because the cost of higher education is so high. So I would say absolutely. And by the way, the Community Service Society just issued a report saying that an unintended consequence of some of the new standards in the public colleges and universities see the numbers since that time of open enrollment dropping for African American and Latino students. And I'm glad you indicated that at the moment, generally, that open enrollment began, tuition started also. So there's been a constant push against people of color, African American, Latinos, and others, coming in to the public systems. And that's one of the challenges of accessibility. So we need more, and we need men and women in the provost positions and in the president positions who will hire them. Because we have a number of men and women who present themselves. And one last thing on the new standards, so that we might meet the global economy requirements. I don't agree with that, and I'll fight with them in a minute about that. But, however, in that sense, and I'm making all these great arguments about culture, you know, we certainly need men and women with terminal degrees in engineering and in physics, you know, and in computer information systems and things like that, because we don't have that either in the numbers. And finally, I know I keep jumping, when we do produce a PhD in chemical engineering, the chances are that a Borough Manhattan Community College or State University or Westbury can't get them, because the Harvards, for real, will snatch them up.
That's right. That's right.
Snatch them up quick and pay them.
Yes.
We'll give them good money and course releases so that they can work and write and study. And if your mind is, you know, somehow tainted by the missionary faith of the West, materialism, then you're going to go where the dollars are. It's a challenge.
May I just support Dr. Butts in a 30-second piece? First of all, let me say that the problem of the community colleges and the state colleges is multiply that by some number, and that's the problem of the historic black college in recruiting the finest African American scholars. There are some African American scholars who will go to these schools out of devotion, but that is getting to be less and less. Right? Now, I have to say that on the question of higher ed, we are just, we've gotten a signal that we have to quit. And I'm going to say to Adrian and Jean, we need to continue this discussion about higher ed and what is underpinning, because on the question of engineers, and that's the wave of the future in the near term anyway.
STEM in general.
Sitting on the, Courtney, help me out here, sitting on the platform at commencement at Rutgers. See, I know there are black people who can master every dimension of engineering. I know this.
That's right.
Some of them haven't even been born yet.
That's right.
But I know this. But I sit at on the platform as the degrees are being awarded at Rutgers. For the last several years. And when we grant the PhDs and masters in almost any area of engineering, a huge percentage of these awardees are from Asia. Am I right? I mean, the white people are in the minority.
That's right.
And every now and then you see this lone African-American woman, you know, who knows what she's had to go through to weather this storm, comes across that stage. And of course, I feel like getting up shouting. But we've got to figure out, why is it that we are not getting there? That's part of the challenge of this higher education. We know we can do it, but why aren't we?
All right. We're going to let Sam make a very brief comment, followed by Darrell making a very brief comment. And then we're going to move on to the next question after we hear what Reverend Bindle has to say as well. All right, Sam?
Well, I just wanted to answer a question. Yes, I agree there should be more people of color in the teaching professions, and we have to go there, right? I also agree that we need to have more males.
Right.
And finally, we also have to have more exceptional teachers, regardless of race or color, in the teaching profession.
Thanks, Sam. Darrell?
I just wanted to add, we talked a lot about increasing the pipeline, but it's also equally important to retain the current teachers and faculty members that are there, and specifically through providing, perhaps an affinity network to keep these people together. They're all facing the same struggle in a lot of ways, and I think the burnout that they suffer is very real. So I think we're finding ways, incentivizing perhaps ways to retain the faculty and teachers that we do have is equally important.
Father Bindle?
My comment would be, I'm going to go back to Oxford for just 1 second. When I asked my daughter about the government, she said all of these people are graduates of Oxford and Cambridge. And I said, how come you didn't teach them values? How come you didn't teach them values? And so we're back to the value issue. I'm very happy that the conversation took the turn towards culture. Terribly important that we know our history so that we can know who we are. And that conversation about culture is always a conversation about values. So absolutely, we need to affirm that, we need to endorse that, and we need to act upon it. And I'll mention, by way of a note of appreciation, Adrian Council has been lifting up the 150th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. It's profound. It's profound. And I think it's important for us to know that this is not simply an African-American issue. The Emancipation Proclamation and the Civil War defines what America is and who we are as a people. And so therefore there's absolutely nothing marginalized about the African-American community. You're plopped at the center of American history, and the African-American community defines what it means to be an American, to be part of a nation of brothers and sisters where there is freedom of opportunity and equality for all. And part of that involves valuing our own heritage and valuing ourselves as black people. I sometimes think of myself as an honorary black person since I've lived most of my life in the black community. It's terribly important that we love each other and that we recognize our gifts and affirm that our children can become anything they want to be. And we're also called to enlarge their vision so that they might hope to become doctors and physicists and engineers and teachers and writers and musicians and even the President of the United States. That's where we need to go.
Thank you, Dr. Bindle. We have more questions. One more question.
This question is actually from Twitter via Edutelligencia. The question is, how are education partners working with each other to vertically align academics and support student readiness and success? For example, is Newark Public Schools working with Essex County College? Is Essex County College talking with Rutgers University Newark? And how are they all aligned?
Yes.
Reverend Howard?
Well, they are, in fact, those three that you mentioned. I'm not sure how widespread it is. There are articulation agreements between community colleges and certain state colleges that allow students to move smoothly from the community college. I think there could be closer collaboration between, let's say, the Newark Public Schools and Essex County College, but there is some level of collaboration. But the connection between Rutgers and Essex County is pretty seamless. Am I right, Courtney? I mean, if you are a high-performing student at Essex, I think you're virtually guaranteed admission to the second of the 4-year term at Rutgers. But I'm not sure how widespread it is. I think the questioner really may be interested in whether this is a universal phenomenon or not. Now, I will say that at Essex, a community college, which I think is open enrollment, am I right? Tells us about the academic deficits of children who graduate from Newark Public High Schools when they enter the community college. I think Newarkers are generally familiar with those stats. That tells us the gravity of the work that we have to do.
Thank you. Dr. Forbes has a question. Dr. Forbes, right here. Courtney, right there.
James Forbes. Elton Trueblood said that one of the most important words in the Bible is "and." Now, after President Obama had come up before us, we thought people were saying, oh, we have a post-racial society now. Everybody figured out, oh, that didn't happen. So from the conversation I'm hearing about higher education, it seems that we need to have something like the Leadership Forum or the team of folks that used to go to the White House with King, and Whitney Young was there and Wilkins was there. It seems like all of a sudden there's a need for a higher level of collectivity of black leadership to address the problems of black people. But at the same time, there's a man, Delgado here, and the question is, do we have time to do full advocacy for black causes and at the same time promote black-brown relationships, which increasingly, that may be problematic, but there may be some potential? Or is it black, brown, and white, and in asking for more than 24 hours a day? So I'm asking, what model of leadership coalition is necessary to help black people? And if you can give me that model, does it mean that we're going to spend more time with black folks dealing with black problems? Or are we going to do that one and at the same time get with Sam and do the black-brown thing, and also get with the president of the seminary and do the black, brown, and white? So I'm just raising that question in terms of how we use our time.
Who's going first on this?
That's why Jim Forbes came over here.
Yeah, we
To stir the water. Yes, sir.
All right, Sam, you're first.
I would be blind if I did not say that there's going to be competition. Okay? There's only so many resources, all right? So let's talk real, all right? But, you know, that's why people of good conscience, that's why the churches, we try to elevate, you know, it's about elevating ourselves to being better human beings, right? And loving each other, and having that communication that there will be moments of disagreement. There are moments of disagreement right now, all right? But hopefully, all right, we will be able to, all right? And I'm not trying to be a Pollyanna, you know, pie in the sky. I think it's a process that we have to work through, and we have to continue to work at it, all right? Or else we're all doomed. That's my answer.
Darryl, let's get Darryl. You want to get in this conversation?
Sure, I can add something to this.
I think
you know, I actually, and I don't have any numbers to back this up, but I'm firmly in the column that there's enough resources for all colors at the same time. I don't believe that there's a black-brown competition, so to speak, because the truth is they're doing the jobs that we won't do. So, you know, in a lot of ways, right? So there's obviously not a lot of competition there, but I think what is more important to the conversation of how to get everyone resources is to look at what the investments are currently going to, whether that be from corporations saying, okay, who am I going to hire? Do we kind of look at the old model of affirmative action in hiring models as well? Do we go back to that? I'm not sure, you know, but I do believe that there's enough resources out there for all colors right now, and I don't necessarily see as much overlap as what we hear right now, just for that reason.
Dr. Butts, give him the mic, please.
This is, you know, this could be, the past is the past somewhat, but you learn a lot from where you've been.
Say that.
Dr. King, if I can just use that. Let's just go back to Adam Powell, Jr. If I look at what they did, their focus was unapologetically on the Negro, the black, the African American. But if I look at Powell's legislation, for example, he's the most productive congressperson we've seen. What he was arguing for on behalf of people of color was in fact good for everybody. If we take higher education or primary education, Head Start, that came out of his legislation. BEOG, TAP, those kinds of things came out of education and labor. Now there are more white people in Head Start and dealing with TAP than there are black people, you know, if the truth be told. Now, moreover, when Dr. King was marching and the walls, figuratively, came tumbling down, Jim, you know as well as I do who ran across the rubble. Black people, to be sure. White women, they didn't have, you know, Latinos, you know. So I think that if we champion our cause as African American people, and not get caught up on as people of African descent, African Caribbean and all that mess. I think if we champion the cause as people of African descent, we will be speaking to the large majority of Americans who are poor, disenfranchised, and neglected in this country. And it will be up to many of them whether they want to employ their racism and not run across the rubble when the walls come tumbling down. But we should never be apologetic about standing for black people. And I think that we will make a way, you know, for everybody else. That's what I saw in Dr. King. That's what I saw in Adam Jr. And incidentally, that's what I saw in Malcolm and his transition. So, you know, we can stand strong. And when I take a look at the influence, particularly of Latinos and others, it is fundamentally African in its root. And when we come together, we have never been, you know, Brother Delgado said, when I said, Delgado gonna be as black as me, he said, yeah, they are as black as you. You know, so I understand where you're going. And I think the coalition will form itself. But I think that in many ways, as we always have, black people have got to take the lead.
Thank you, Dr. Father Bendel, and then Reverend Howard.
Just one brief word in response to Dr. Butts' comments. I would like to say a very loud amen. Amen to that. One topic we didn't talk about today is the issue of class. And if the African community addresses its issues as the African American community, I'm quite sure that the great majority of Americans will respond, because we're not just talking here about racial or ethnic differences, we're talking about difficulties with the middle class. We're all called to be part of the larger pie, and we're all called to be citizens and Americans together, whatever our background may be.
Thank you. I think this issue of the class divide is a very significant one that we did not get into today, and any honest and legitimate discussion of this and a number of other issues that does not factor in this issue of class is not a full discussion. Reverend Howard, and then we've got a question. Reverend Howard?
Well, I'm maybe coming out at this breakfast. I'm going to acknowledge that I'm an advocate of the Negro tribe, the sons and daughters of Africa who lived through Jim Crow, who survived Jim Crow, prospered presumably. But I think if the Negro tribe does not circle the wagon, it links itself to other people of African descent, and then you go to the question of poverty and so forth. But I think Jesse once said something, and somebody will help me, if we don't look out for us, nobody else will. He said it in a more poetic way. I actually think that's true. I think that's true as a group. And we have to deal with the class issues within our group, which are considerable, and it is embarrassing as we seek racial solidarity. We don't like to talk about it. But I would answer Dr. Forbes' question like this. Dr. Freeman, I think he was Robert Freeman, Harlem Hospital. Is it Robert Freeman? Harold. He surgeon. 100 years ago, we were on a subcommittee of the American Cancer Society, which he eventually led. And he was arguing...
But you didn't do this 100 years ago, did you?
No, not literally. Not literally. A long time ago. I had hair, I'll say that. He was inside there arguing that more resources of the American Cancer Society should be focused on Central Harlem and Watts or Compton or wherever you know, those places where people were neglected in early detection and other kinds of access to care. Because his point was if the American Cancer Society wanted to report a longer survivor rate, a larger survivor rate, it would go to the places where the most people were dying of cancer. And if you went there and treated the worst, then the whole thing would be better. Now, I'm going to argue what I see in America is a complete, and this goes right to the White House, a complete lack of overt talk about the cancer in the post-industrial cities. And I think those of us who are operating in these places have got to put the people in those places first. And if you can figure out how to deal with my young brothers who are populating the youth house in Newark, then you're going to have a situation similar to the impact of Adam Clayton Powell's legislation. If we look after the Negro and what's best for the Negro, then a whole bunch of folk who don't even feel akin to us are going to benefit. I want you to read a New York Times article today about the study of the healthcare lottery in the state of Oregon. And this is posited as an example of what might happen if we go national. We understand that's the big issue. And what they point out is that the people who get accessible health care, even though they don't have a lot of money, they live wonderfully positive lives. Their trajectory is so much more positive. Isn't that right? It says that. But then it said, the other point they learn is that it is very expensive with relatively little savings. Because the people with free care, they go to the doctor more often, you know, so forth. And the question in that article for me, the most important question is, does the nation have a commitment to this? Does the nation have a commitment? This is really the issue we've been struggling with. I mean, the Great Society was nothing but an attempt at a great society. So many of these things we go look at as some kind of great social milestone, they were a step in the right direction that was thwarted. Am I right?
Right.
The nation has to decide. Does it want a nation of educated, competent, competitive citizens? Or does it want a bunch of people who are unprepared to raise the nation up by brain power and willingness to work? Same thing about illness.
Thank you, Dr. Howard.
Please, let me just... But my main point really was, we're talking with, and I promise you this will be very brief, we're talking internal to the U.S. And I'm going to tell you, Martin also said, whatever you do, make sure you're not on the wrong side of the world revolution. Did he say that?
Yeah.
We, in this country, consume over 40% of the vital resources of the earth. And the definition of freedom that I grew up on is getting more of what white people have. That's what freedom was. Now, we're going to have to start thinking about how we fit in a global world, because I maintain there are enough resources in the world. I want to support you. But the issue is how they're distributed. Jim, you know what I'm talking about. This is the issue. And that means we're going to have to drive the Prius, when being free means that we drive the S-Class 600. See that? God bless you.
You can only do that with a liberal arts education. You can't educate to the marketplace.
And you can't go to a for-profit college and get that either. We didn't mention that one.
No, we didn't. All right, we have about 2 minutes and one final question.
Good afternoon. My name is Brandon McCullough, and first I want to thank the Positive community for putting this very thought-provoking panel together. My question is, how do we better implement some of the programs and educational systems that are out there and really working for black children in the community now? When I think of, for example, Harlem Children's Zone with the gentleman from the Waiting for Superman documentary, or the brother Stephen Perry, I believe, has a school in Connecticut that has a 100% graduation rate for those children there. And I seen the other day on MSNBC, there was a young lady who had a preparatory school, liberal arts school in Chicago, who not only had a 100% graduation rate, but a 100% college placement rate, and all black children. So these programs out there, we have answers for them, obviously. How do we better work with these solutions and kind of implement them abroad for everyone?
Thank you for your question. Who wants to try that? Reverend Howard, is that something you want to pick up on?
I've been talking
And be
too much.
brief.
Let somebody else respond.
All right.
That's a good question.
I'd like to.
By the way, how old are you, may I ask? Roughly.
28.
28.
All right.
You don't exist. I have an illusion. You get the point? Now, this is another issue we have to confront. You see this handsome, well-dressed, well-spoken black boy, man? What explains how he got there? I'm going to leave that.
Not in this room.
And by the way, there are there's a whole cluster of such people in the world. I'm sitting next to one of them. We need to figure out, why is it that young black boys are excelling while so many black boys are not?
You get. Let me just say that quickly. With those that you named earlier, I named Marva Collins, Barbara Sizemore, but then Benjamin E. Mays, Mary McLeod Bethune, W.B. Du Bois, Barbara Sizemore, and there are a number of others across the country who have successful programs. Now, one of the things is, of course, you can lean on Mr. Duncan, Arnie Duncan, you know, to convene these thinkers to get the best practices and set certain standards, and then put the money behind it. Waiting for Superman is great, and I don't have a problem with Jeffrey Canada, but that is not the primary solution, because that's charter, And most of our children in Newark and Harlem are going to be in the public schools for a long time. But having his thinking is something from which we can benefit. Finally, and I will say this, and many of you have watched it, where we have seen these overwhelming successes of producing young men like yourself and others, you have also seen, and I will use the term, a conspiracy to work against them. Because it is not to the advantage of white world supremacy to have you emerge as a clear-thinking young black man who is talking about this radical over here to my right, Bill Howard, talking about some rearrangement of the resources. Because if you had, as Chris Rock puts it well, he said if Bill Gates woke up one morning with Oprah Winfrey's money, he'd jump out of a window. You're not going to give up a key, powerful position without a struggle. And that struggle can only be fueled by young men such as yourself. So there's one solution to bring us all together in some kind of think tank and make the purposes, but then to have someone in place who is bold enough and will take the risks to implement it. That could be a president, that could be a secretary of education, for example.
Thank you. The last comment will be given by Dr. Bendel.
Very briefly, I'll speak in sound bites here. It seems to me that we're getting to the point where the conversation is really just opening up. Class, values, these things that we're talking about now. So it's been wonderful. We have to thank Adrian Council and Jean Nash Wells for their work. You see, it is about values. Let's remember the black church and the importance of the black church. I've served in black churches during the time that I was in the South Ward at St. Andrew's Church. We got 3 doctors out of that church. We got 1 civil engineer. There was not a single person, young person in that church that went to jail or got into trouble. It's a matter of values, worshiping God, learning self-respect. The black church is incredibly important and effective in its work. It's needed. And we need to support it and be part of it.
Thank you so much. Now, everybody, please join me in thanking Reverend Douglas Bendel, Darrell Garrett, Reverend M. William Howard, Brother Sam Delgado, and, of course, Dr. Calvin Vaughn. And now for Adrian Council.
Just want to thank some of the people that have been supportive of us here, and our consultant, Courtney Adams. She's really done a wonderful job. Upcoming already, of course, Herb Glenn, who's doing the video, another key person in our wheel, and again, everyone who's come out here today. I want to ask Reverend Elizabeth Campbell if she might be able to give us the benediction. And of course, above all, I'd like to thank my business partner of 31 years, Jean Nash Wells. Dr. Campbell is the former president of the Baptist Ministers Conference of Newark, Greater Newark and vicinity, and she has actually made every single one of our round tables, and I thank God for her.
May we stand. How grateful we are to you, dear Heavenly Father, for another day, another time of togetherness, thought-provoking, stimulating roundtable discussion. We thank you for each presenter. Thank you for positive community. Thank you for all of those who are supporting this effort. Lord, as we depart from here, may we take what we have discussed and even learned to higher heights. May we be continually mindful of our young people in utero on up to adulthood, that we might stimulate our community, our churches, our schools, and yes, even our government, to do what is necessary and do what it takes on behalf of our children. We thank you, we bless you, we praise you, and as we leave, may we continue to look to you, who is our source of strength. Thank you. Thank you. In Jesus' name, I say, amen.
Amen. And one more acknowledgement is to our consultant, Ms. Kay Lucas. Could you just wave your hand, look? There we go. Okay, now that's everybody. Thank you so much, and thank you to all of our presenters who came out and gave us this evening. Thank you. Is Nick Mancini here? Come on up, Nick, for a minute. Let's let everybody know who you
Give us some legitimacy and bring food over here.
No, we got it.
Come over here.
No, I'm going to get them in the next one. Okay. Come here for a second. Okay. All right.
We're a New Testament people. We're a New Testament.
It's a clergy picture.
Clergy.
Oh, you just want the clergy. Is that what you're saying? Maybe I should get out of the picture.
Don't leave yet.
I know. I gave her the name.
Yeah. Okay, great. Now, if you don't mind, just like a few more minutes.
You just said this was the last thing a minute ago. Over there, you said that's all we had to do.
And I'm starting with you. I'm going down to you.
What are we doing? I New York.
Unfortunately, I'd like to get the shot.
He has to travel further.
Hey, I can't.
Look at the blanket.
Okay. Are we ready, guys? Are we ready to shoot?
And tell me what you do.
Reverend Butts, thank you so much for being part of the Newark Roundtable Leadership Series today. Just a few questions in summary of your experience here. What do you think are really the critical and urgent issues from this discussion that should be considered as part of this discussion?
Affordability and access. College, higher education is very expensive, even in the public institutions, but I would encourage people to look more closely at the public institutions. And access. We have to prepare our young men and women to be college ready. They have to learn how to write especially, but also reading. And this goes then into the deeper issues that we face in primary and secondary education. That's a long discussion, but affordability and access are the two challenging issues, I think.
Fantastic. How, both personally and professionally, what is the value of having these kind of conversations?
Well, for me, those persons who attend have resources to work with, hopefully, as a result of being here. We mentioned books that they can read. We give concepts that they can consider. Many people here are educators already, or they have been. They work in their churches. They encourage and inspire students. They give information, counsel to students who are maybe on their way to college, or they devise programs in the churches or in the colleges where they work that can help support or encourage students. So I find this to be particularly stimulating because I hear from my colleagues in ministry as well as my colleagues in higher education. So I go away with concepts and ideas that may be helpful to me, and I hope others will do the same.
And finally, what do you think are the most important takeaways from this discussion in terms of next steps?
Well, the most important takeaways from this discussion in terms of next steps, one is that we ought to do it again. Two is that we ought to expand the audience. And three is that we really need to have more legislators here. men and women who make the laws, particularly where public education is concerned, and men and women who can, if they say nothing, benefit from hearing what the people say. I always find these to be stimulating, not because I'm a panelist, but because of what I learned from listening to those who are on the panel. And so let's do it again.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being a part.
It's good to see you.
Newark Leadership Roundtable Series today. In terms of summarizing the conversation, just a few questions. What would you say were the most critical and urgent issues that were discussed on in the discussion today?
Well, for me, I think the most critical issue is the price of education in this country today. You heard me mention that it costs $60,000 room and board tuition to go to a school like Johns Hopkins. It's creating two tiers of society. Those people that can afford to go to college and those people that can't. In addition, it's burdening our young people with these great debts when they graduate college. And that's unsustainable. So we have to figure out a way, to solve this, all right, to make it more equitable, or else you're going to have two separate societies.
How personally and professionally, at your experience at Verizon and historically, how do you personally and professionally value these experiences and conversations?
Oh, I value them tremendously. First of all, it gives business people like myself an opportunity to sit down and talk with leaders in various communities. For example, today was the African American community, a very, very important customer base for Verizon. Okay, African Americans use our products and services to a great extent. Okay, whether it's the wireless, whether it's the iPad, whether it's FiOS, all right, and we have to be engaged in these in the community of colors, all right. Yeah.
And finally, what do you think are the most important takeaways and next steps from a discussion like today's?
I think the next step is the execution part, all right? We did a lot of great talking today. There were a lot of ideas that were bounced around. I like to see it executed now. That's really going to be the telling part, how we execute, how we take it back to our communities and become better educated people.
Fantastic. Thank you again so much for participating. It's a pleasure meeting you. Thank you again for being part of the Newark Leadership Roundtable series. We really appreciate your input. Just a few questions to summarize your experience in this discussion today. What do you think are really the most critical and urgent issues pertaining to this discussion?
You know, I really think the discussion around access to higher education and the cost of higher education by far were the two issues that I think were across the board brought up by everyone on the panels today. So it shows that that's something that everyone's taking notice of and something that is critical to higher education and the direction in which it's headed. So I would say by far access and the cost.
Fantastic. Now, personally and professionally, how do you value these type of discussions on an individual level?
Sure. Personally, I think they're extremely valuable because I love to hear the other ideas that are out there as it relates to these type of topics and discussions. And also, you know, I love it when the conversation goes towards solutions for these things personally. On a professional level, I think it's extremely important to be around what would be considered peers, to hear what their thoughts are around this and maybe some of their best practices as it relates to those who are actually in the field of higher education. So.
Fantastic. And lastly, what do you think are the most important takeaways from the event in terms of next steps?
I think actually one of the larger takeaways is that there's a need for this to continue, to be an ongoing discussion instead of kind of like a one day off. And one day and then off, you know, back out into the world with the discussion kind of dying out. So I would love to be able to see this continue in a more substantive way where there is a discussion around the solutions to these problems that we've identified today. So.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again for your participation. You did a great job. Thank you for participating in today's Newark Leadership Roundtable series. Just a few questions to summarize your experience and the discussion today. What would you say are the most critical and urgent issues that were discussed on today's panel?
Well, I think the issue of the pipeline to higher education, the accessibility from a financial point of view of higher education, the purpose of higher education, and what signals is the community sending that either inspires young people to pursue higher education or not.
Fantastic. Now, on a personal and professional level, what do you value these types of discussions?
I value positive community as an organ of communication, and I've attended others of these forums. They are touching upon the critical issues that impact the community, economics and health, now higher education. I'm not sure of the others, but these are critical questions, and they provide an opportunity for people who have expertise to speak to community leaders and to be engaged by them.
Fantastic. And lastly, what do you think are the most important takeaways from this discussion in terms of next steps?
Honestly, I don't know. And by the way, next steps are fine, but the conversation has its own value. There are people here representing different kinds of organizations. Maybe they receive something they can use in their daily work. But we each have to think about what it is we must do with what we learned. I'm a parent, but unfortunately, or fortunately, my children are all college graduates and graduate school educated and so on. So the challenge of inspiring young people, I look at this from the standpoint of a pastor who must speak with young people, question their expectations in the future, but to do that fairly early in life, because once they've reached senior high school, the die has been cast. Their record has been created for their capacity to access higher education. So I do a fair amount of that, and I work with other persons, lay people in the church who do that. I think we have to also be prepared to assist parents, because now the deficits in our community regarding higher education are now in second and third generation. So we have a number of parents with children now involved in the areas of education, levels of education, who themselves need help. So, for example, in our church, we have a robust program in adult literacy, as an example. So I think people, depending on where their station is, should have gotten something of value from this exchange of views. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for participating. So thank you so much for being part of the Newark Leadership Roundtable Series today. Just a few questions in summary about the discussion today and your participation. What would you say are the most critical and urgent issues that were discussed today?
I think that many people focused on the issue of accessibility and the affordability of college education. I think that during the course of the discussion we tagged many other very important issues, so I think overall it was very fruitful.
Personally and professionally, why do you value these types of opportunities and events?
Well, as I said in one of my remarks, I think it's really important for us to ask the big questions. What is education? What values do we abide by, and what values do we actually live by? What's the point of what it is that we're doing? Thinking in a general framework and looking at the big picture is critically important in order to be effective on the ground and to develop effective strategies for education.
Fantastic. And finally, what do you think are the most important takeaways from this discussion in terms of next steps?
Well, I think the conversation needs to continue. I think that we all gave our input. There was a focus upon affordability and accessibility, which are really two of the critical issues. But during the course of the discussion, other central factors entered in as well. Value issues, even the role of the middle class, cultural issues, historical issues. So I think we've got the beginnings of a really good conversation, and so I'm looking forward to the next one. I see this as a platform that launches the next conversation.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your participation.